All right, we are live here. Welcome to our sound for video session. Today is the, I don't quite remember, 16th or so of November, 2019. And today we're going to run through, actually the 17th, excuse me. We're going to run through live streaming setup. So both audio and camera setup, what that looks like. And then we'll take some questions if we need to do that. So I am not really a streaming expert, but I have had a number of people ask. I think we've finally gotten to the point here where our live streams are not as embarrassing in terms of the audio quality as they used to be. So, or overall quality as they used to be. There are still some challenges, but this setup seems to be working decently. Let's show you what it's all about here. See if I can get things set up here. Okay. So here is my iMac. I am on a Mac. And then you can see over here we have the Panasonic GH5S. That's the camera we're using for streaming. This has a clean HDMI output, and that feeds down here into the AJA UTAP HDMI converter. So what this does essentially is it takes an HDMI signal and converts it to USB and feeds that into the computer. So essentially that makes the Lumix, or the Panasonic GH5S, a webcam as far as the computer is concerned. So that's how that setup works. Oh, you couldn't see that. Here is the AJA. Let me just lock that in a little bit. There we go. So this is called the AJA UTAP. I think it runs around $300 as I recall, somewhere in that range. We'll put a link for that down below. Oh, you can see it just kind of freaked out. I just probably messed things up there. So these things I found to be, this one actually works better than the Blackmagic one for me. Blackmagic makes one as well. I think we just need to reset both sides here. It can be a little flaky. You can see what I mean by frustrating. These are probably going to need to restart this app too. So I've got HDMI on that side, USB on that side. Ecamm Live is the name of the app I'm using. Let's pull that up and see how we do this time. We're not resuming. Okay, there it is. So you can see, I think you can see it's looking a little better now. So that's the AJA UTAP. Once you get it set up and it's running, it's pretty solid. So, but it can be a little flaky at the start. So they're kind of weird that way. I noticed the same thing with the Blackmagic. I don't know if it's because I'm on a Mac or perhaps it's other things. So Alejandro just asked, what is this thing? This is a converter. It takes an HDMI feed from the camera and then has an USB output that feeds to the computer. So it essentially makes your camera with an HDMI output, in this case a GH5S, into a webcam. All right, so that's what we've got in terms of video. Now, what we also have going here, of course, is a MixPre, in this case a MixPre 3.2. It is running in 24-bit mode, and this is an interesting conversation here, I think, because obviously the camera does not have wide dynamic range, audio wide dynamic range capabilities. So what I'm really relying on the MixPre 3 to do is obviously, here I've got my, I don't have a view of everything here. Here's my Shure SM7B. Yeah, you can see it now. That is feeding into the MixPre 3. So we got that gained up. We applied about 60 decibels of gain. It's typically where I end up on that. And then we're in 24-bit mode. And so I'm relying on the MixPre 3 to capture any potential clipping with its limiters. So in any case, that's kind of the strategy here. That's why I like to use the MixPre, because it does have those analog limiters to catch those issues. These two other channels are red because I've muted them, because obviously it's just me on this particular live stream. And then you can see this cable coming out here is the stereo output from the MixPre 3, and I feed that into the camera. You can see it runs up here to the camera. So this is the microphone input on the camera. This cable is coming from the MixPre 3. And the reason I feed it to camera as opposed to setting up the Mix Pre 3 as a USB audio interface to the computer is that this avoids any sort of sync issues. And I did find on my early streaming, I actually would use my regular audio interface, which is now over here. This is the Apollo X6 from Universal Audio. The reason I don't use that now is because I would run into sync issues. So I could use this setup over here for camera with the AJA UTAP, and then I would have the audio interface going into the computer. But what happened was any of the live streaming apps, generally, I ran into issues with sync. So the audio was out of sync with the video. So instead, for my live streams, I found it's better off using the Mix Pre 3 basically as a preamplifier and as a limiter, and then feeding the audio stream from there directly into camera. So that avoids the sync issues because now both the video and the audio is coming from the GH5S. That, of course, goes into the UTAP, and then that goes into the computer. So that's kind of the basic setup there. Now, as far as the app I'm using, again, I'm on a Mac, and so I did work with OBS for a little bit, but I ran into some issues with OBS in terms of just stability and reliability. That was the Mac version. I think the PC version may be a little bit more solid. I'm not sure, but there came a point where I just said, you know what, I need something that's a little bit more reliable. So that's what Ecamm Live is here. Now you can't see the up close, but let me just kind of run you through some of the things we have here. So here's the main kind of monitoring window where I can see what scene is on screen right now. So as I sit down here, here's my main camera. I can switch over to do a keynote presentation. So that's the equivalent of PowerPoint for those on the PC. Here I can just show my Windows desktop. Here's my starting soon page. And then when the live stream is over, I've got this. So Casper Markowitz, I'm not sure I'm saying your name right, Mark Casper, but and I don't know if you watch these sound for video sessions, but he's my graphic designer. He did a really nice job, I think, on these here. So thanks for watching, and here's the one where we're going to start soon. So you can switch back and forth between all those different views or scenes, as they call them. The thing I really like about Ecamm Live, which makes it nice, is you can see there's a comments and reactions window up here. So when I'm live streaming to YouTube, the chat actually shows up right here. So that's really helpful for me to keep in touch with what people are saying or questions they're asking. And what's more, and I can't demonstrate it because we're not actually live here right now, but when those comments show up, there's a little link underneath each of them, which allows me to display that comment or question right here. It'll include their YouTube sort of icon, and it will display their question or comment, which is really nice. It makes it a lot more, makes it easier to have kind of a community live stream gathering kind of session. So I really like that about it as well. You can monitor your audio levels here, and let's see. This is another thing that I've noticed is a little flaky here. I'm going to need to quit the app, start it again. Ecamm. And you'll notice when I come in here, interestingly, I bet you, I don't want to read to zoom. Normally you have a meter here. It's not a very useful meter. I would much prefer to use the Mix Pre meters, but you need a meter at the end of the signal chain for whatever reason. And this is usually kind of this little song and dance I have to go through before the start of each one, is make sure this meter is working here. It's not currently, I don't have time to troubleshoot it at the moment, but that's one of the things, the challenges that I do face. Now in terms of monitoring audio, another thing I do is I actually don't monitor from the Mix Pre. Learned that lesson the hard way. Instead, I actually monitor from the camera. So I'll plug my headphones directly in to the camera's headphone output. You generally want to monitor when you're doing live broadcasts. You're going to want to monitor as close to the end of the signal chain as possible. And the reason you do that is that that way you can tell if there's a problem anywhere in the signal chain. So obviously we would want these meters, and I don't understand why these meters aren't working. We're getting, the signal is coming into the camera just fine, but Ecamm Live is not showing, it's not putting forth its best foot tonight. Sometimes starting the app over inexplicably solves that problem. I'm not sure why. Okay. And we are still not getting any sort of audio on this meter. I will need to look at that in more detail another time. So in any case, headphone monitoring here on the camera, which is the kind of the, that's one place I can monitor. I haven't tried monitoring on the computer. That would probably be that's even farther back, closer to the end of the signal chain. But my fear is that there's going to be some latency when I do that because the HDMI output is somewhat delayed, and so that would create this really echoey situation. So that wouldn't be very practical for monitoring during the live stream. So I typically monitor with the headphone jack here. What else about Ecamm Live? So Ecamm Live will stream, it integrates with a variety of different streaming services. I was only interested really in using it with YouTube, but you can use it for other services as well. You can use Stream Deck. So if you're interested in using the control surface by Stream Deck, they do have a plug-in here that you can use. And that will that gives you basically a control surface to control what's happening and which scenes you're showing and which comments go up on the screen and things of that nature. So some pretty cool features there for sure. So that is a look at that. Let's turn this around now here. Let's see if I can get this to work. Ooh. White balance on a phone is tricky business. All right, let's see what comments we have out there. We're going to look at the live chat. Oh yeah, I can do that on the phone here. Fun, okay. All right, Mark Randall, greeting fellow mortals. Welcome, Alejandro. Brent. Rest in peace, OBS. I don't have anything against OBS. It just wasn't working in our case. So I was, in that case, I was just being Mr. Practical. So nothing against it. If you can get it working, by all means, get it working. It's free, so there's definitely, this is a paid app, so this is like $150 a year. It's a subscription thing. Again, it's working fine. So, all right. If you were to do a webinar, would you use the same setup? Yeah, I think I would. I would probably, well, I'm not sure which platform you're referring to specifically, but this works pretty nicely for me. Once it's set up and it's running, don't touch anything. Just go live at that point, and everything's been solid from there. So what I can say is this. So the internet connection I have here is fiber, but it's 100 megabits up and downstream. And that's fine for just live streaming just myself. But what I have had problems with is that it doesn't seem to work very well if I am having like a Skype call with somebody else, like if I want to bring a guest in. It can work reliably for a little while, but then almost inevitably it starts cutting in and out. So I haven't been doing as much of those. So what I typically do is if I am going to have a guest on, what I do now is I just have a Skype call and I record that. And then I post it later on. So it's not live in that case. So I don't know what the bandwidth requirements really are to effectively pull that off. But in any case, that's where we're at here. With that auto color balance, poor Curtis is cycling through a range of illnesses. Yeah, I wonder if I turn, so I have, oh, that's one other thing. Let me just show you, I didn't cover that before. Let's switch this camera around here. Here we go. So there's a light here. This is a Falcon Eyes LED flexible panel that I reviewed some time ago. It does have a softbox on the front here to soften things up a little bit. I have left enough room behind my desk so I could put a C-stand back there and put that up there. And typically I'll put some kind of accent lights behind me as well, but that is that setup there for those that were curious about that. So definitely have to get your lighting. Now it's creating an awful mess here. Let's see if I turn that off, what happens. With an iPhone, ooh, not quite as ill. That looks a little better, I think, at least on this end. I don't know for you guys. All right. Let's see what other things. Okay, Brent says, I love the eCam setup. I was noticing how you were displaying the YouTube comments in your last video, and that is an excellent feature. I agree. That's probably the biggest feature for me. I really love that feature because it makes it a lot more interactive and things of that nature. A few more comments from Mark and Thomas on the color balance. I think we got that sorted. Synchronized connectivity, holy crap. Yeah, it's pretty decent here. I live out in the sticks, and so that makes it a little easier to run fiber. So we got really lucky. There aren't as many roads and sidewalks and driveways to worry about. So because of that, we got lucky and we were able to get fiber. So I'm not willing to pay the price just yet of for the faster bandwidth, but that's doing a job pretty decently right now. All right, Aaron says, imagine having IP-DTL in the mic too, or in the mix too. Aaron, I'm not sure I follow IP-DTL. I'm not sure what that is. Greg Allen, welcome. Wow, 150 megabits up and down. In Germany, there is no solution to get that fast upload as a private customer. Actually, it's 100 here, but I actually think I can get 200, but it's pretty pricey. And it is very early in Germany, 4:54. 4:56 now. Shouldn't you be sleeping? All right, Alejandro, I really like your setup. What other goodies do you have in the background? Okay, let's talk about that. See if I can switch this around here. What else? What other goodies do we have here? Not all of this, of course, is live streaming. Oh yeah, one thing that's important here. Near field monitors, mute those. Make sure that you don't have anything coming out of those. So during the live stream, the audio interface here, you can see it's red around the monitor dial here. That means it's muted. So I have made that mistake a few times. That will just create a mess there. So definitely something you'll want to mute. So this desk has been pretty useful for me too. It is actually a sit-stand desk, and I would raise it right now, but I don't think I want to because I think it'll hit the monitor will hit the light. This is useful too. What I do typically is you can see this, the camera is on this Gorilla Pod kind of thing. To get the kind of composition right, I may actually raise the desk up a little bit. I don't typically raise it when I'm mixing because this monitor, you can't see here, is on a small stand on the desk, and the monitor over there is actually on a floor stand. So I have the desk height dialed in for stand when I'm doing my typical use. So those are at the same height at where the tweeters are at my ear level, so on and so forth. So, but when I'm live streaming, I'm not using those monitors, so I can lift the desk up a little bit to kind of dial in the composition. Here's something I haven't talked about, and we're kind of getting out of the realm of sound for video at this point, but I guess if you're curious. Here's an OWC SSD drive. It's a super high speed. I think it's a 2 terabyte, but that's basically my work drive. So when I'm editing video, most of my projects will go on there. And then when I'm done, I have a RAID array, a RAID 5 array, and the kind of the long-term storage goes there. Well, actually, I guess the medium-term storage. Long-term storage just goes to a regular spinning disk drive, and then those get archived. So that's that process. What else have we got here? Oh, yes. Speaking of color, I've had plenty of problems with color over time. So this is a color grading monitor back here. So for my clients, I needed the ability to deliver consistent color. It's actually just a Rec 709 grading monitor. It's not HDR. And actually, it's pretty striking to see how different an image will look on a screen like the iMac. So the iMac is capable of 500 nits. peak brightness. Of course, Rec 709 doesn't go that high. So it's really quite striking to see how the image looks so much different on the computer screen versus the color grading screen on a Rec 709 reference monitor. So kind of interesting there. What else can I tell you? Well, let's go back to the comments. Let's see if there are any specific questions. There we go. There I am, way down there. Okay, let's go back to the chat here and see what we got. All right. IP down the line. Okay, voice studios use it to live link up the performances. It's a pain. Okay, that's something in broadcast that I wasn't familiar with. Okay. 100 megabits should be, this is from Mark, 100 megabits per second should be enough to reliably receive about 50 live streams at once. I'd be looking for other bottlenecks in your system. Fair point. Good to know. I think part of the issue is that we have some latency. So while the bandwidth is pretty good, I think the latency may be a bit of an issue. Ariana, Curtis, 100 meg fiber connection me, 1 meg satellite. I'm sorry. That's cool that you can watch a live stream though. All right. Doing my best here. The live chat is a little funky on the phone here. What parts, from Thomas, what parts of the sound treatment of your office are the first phase for getting a good environment for editing dialogue audio? I'm not entirely sure I understand your question, but let me just show you what I do have here. So I worked with an acoustician to design this. And so here's kind of the back of the office. So this one I actually move in front of the door. This one right here I move in front of the door. We have kind of an odd shaped room. It's mostly rectangular with a little kind of cutout for the door which goes out that way. So this kind of goes a few feet in front of the door normally when I'm doing a kind of an important mix. First reflections, I think this is probably going to be, this in front of the door is going to capture that first reflection off that wall. Then of course on the back wall here we have a couple of additional bass traps. Now the interesting thing about these bass traps here, they're thicker first of all, but they also have a kind of a semi-rigid, like a thin layer of semi-rigid material underneath this fabric right here. So the idea was to be able to trap some bass, but not suck up all the high frequencies. And same with this other one here. I can't see the screen now. Yeah, there you can see the second one there. We have one in the corner there. And that's going to be, this one over here is going to be the one that's going to capture the first reflections from my right monitor. Get out of the way here. There's another one over there. We kind of had to do what we could with the space, which is not a big space. And then we have the big corner traps as well. Those are quite thick. Those are probably, they're not going to capture everything, of course, or trap all the bass, but they are probably, I think, 24 inches thick at the center. And so they do, you know, the difference between when I didn't have the treatment and when I got it was quite striking. Pretty big difference there. Okay, coming back to the chat. Oh, I caught a live stream. Woo. All right. Sorry for poking you in the face. I was trying to look at the chat here. The chat's a little funky. Okay, do you use the Rec 709 monitor to grade for your YouTube channel as well? I just started, yeah, I haven't had it a long time, but yes, I do now do it for that. It makes, It's helping. It's helping. That's not my forte necessarily, but it is helping. I now know what it feels like to imagine Curtis is repeatedly poking me in the face. Sorry about that. How do you like the, this is from Blake, how do you like the SM7B into the Mix Pre 3 in comparison to the DBX286S that I see in the back there? Whoa. I ask because I just purchased a Mix Pre 6 on its way and I have a DBX286S. Well, the nice thing about the 286DB or the DBX 286S is that you have some other things. You have a de-esser, which is nice. This is probably a better, well, I mean, this is super simple. This is not processing the audio at all, the Mix Pre. The DBX is, is going to do a couple of things. It has a compressor basically, but it also has a de-esser. It also has the enhancer and the expander, so a noise gate. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but the DBX286 definitely has more options. The Mix Pre is a lot simpler from my standpoint because basically all we're using on the Mix Pre is we're gaining up. we have a limiter in place in case things get a little crazy, capture all of the transients that get too hot. And then I have the ability to use tone from the Mix Pre to get the audio into the camera. So that's super helpful too. So I have the same levels on the camera and the Mix Pre. That's probably the killer feature that makes it so I use the Mix Pre as opposed to the 286. The 286 though, of course, has these additional features. So it's kind of a trade-off. Hope that makes sense. But it's a good question, Blake. The panels look amazing. I would love that setup. I do love that setup. It's made a big difference in terms of monitoring. So I don't have as much sound that continues to run around and phase, do constructive and destructive phase interference and all sorts of funky stuff. So it has made a difference, a significant difference, definitely. All right. Do you prefer hardware or RX7 to clean up simple audio noise? Great question, Lloyd. I don't have any hardware that does, well, I guess the noise gate here. I would prefer RX7 typically, but that's kind of a sound for film guy thing to say. I think there are a lot of people that have done like analog studio stuff that would be more likely to rely on hardware, although I think maybe that's a disappearing art in a lot of ways. Not as many people have a lot of that nice analog gear anymore these days. It seems like maybe I'm wrong, but you would probably know better than I would. But typically actually gates are an interesting thing. Expander gates, those are touchy. You really have to spend some time with them to get to know how to use those effectively to prevent things from starting to sound really weird. Basically what you can do is if you've got enough units that have an expander for each channel, panel discussions, for example, you could essentially create your own auto mixer. But I find that it can be difficult to dial those in. So typically I like to do it in RX where the stakes are a little lower. But if you're doing broadcast, that's a completely different thing. Any sort of live streaming, the game changes entirely. So it's a good question there, Lloyd. I think for live streaming, of course, you're going to want an expander there. All right. Blake asks, as a follow-up to the Mix Pre versus the 286S, I was thinking as far as the gain-hungry SM7B, the Mix Pre has no problem amplifying the SM7B. Typically, I'm running the gain at about 60, and it can go up to 76 decibels of gain. So that seems to be plenty for the SM7B. So it's not even like breaking the sweat. It works really nicely. So. All right, next from Brent, will there be any more episodes of Time and Light? Are you referring to those super old, like my very first videos? We're not doing those anymore. Definitely have moved on from those. As Greg Allen said, my first phase of acoustic treatment should be to focus on first reflection points. Agreed, definitely. Greg Allen mentions, I stopped using my analog gates and compressors in favor of the digital versions. It's interesting. Actually, Lloyd, I'm interested from your point of view. Do you do all your processing digitally, or do you prefer to work with analog outboard gear if you can? Mark says, after watching the F6 video today, I've decided to get buyer's remorse regardless. So unless something forces my hand, this thing. Unless something forces my hand, I'm sticking with the H5 and waiting for a 32-bit F8. I think that's a fine choice, Mark. If you can get away with that, I think that's a fine choice to hold out. I think that I have to imagine that Zoom will add the wide dynamic range recording capabilities to an F8 type of recorder here. So, hi Curtis, I caught your Zoom F6 review. I remember you mentioning it wasn't the best regarding sending scratch audio to prosumer camera. So how do the MixPre second generation recorders fare? Well, spec-wise, they've got a much wider dynamic range on the output, 115 dB A-weighted, dBu A-weighted. I don't know how much of a difference that actually is going to make for most consumer cameras necessarily. It just, I think generally you're going to find it's going to sound a little less crunchy is kind of the best way I can put it, I think. Okay. Brent says, yes, the really old ones. I love those. Greg Allen says, I'm all in the box these days, meaning all digital processing as opposed to analog outboard gear. Yeah, I think, yeah, mostly I am too. All right. I think that's everything we had for tonight. I do have some things coming up. I do have a request for those of you that are in the MixPre course. If you are feeling like there's anything missing from the course, could you contact me and let me know what other topics you'd like to see covered? I think we have coverage on most everything, but if there's anything where you feel like you need a little bit more coverage, we'll look at adding those kind of things. That's one thing. Number two, we are going to be working on the Rode NTG5 review for this next week. This little guy here, whoa, flying covers there. Been pretty impressed with this. Again, RF bias, condenser mic, been really impressed so far. I do like that. I know a lot of people like that kind of broadcasty sound of the NTG3 from Rode. Very much, very similar, in fact, to the MKH416, but this one seems to have a what I would describe as a more kind of realistic low-end response. So that's coming up this next week. Looks like we got a few more comments here. Greg Allen, my analog gear just looks pretty sitting in the rack. Indeed, it's always a cool look. Tommy, hey, thanks for joining, Tommy. Nice setup, thank you. And Jeff says, thanks for your videos. You bet. Thanks for the thanks. Is the NTG5 comparable to the Deity S Mic 2 from Thomas? Or maybe are you asking the S Mic 2S? That's an even more specific question. Yes, you're asking the S Mic 2S, so the short shotgun from Deity. It is and it is not. It is not, well, here's the thing with the Deity mics. So the Deity mics are JFET mics, I believe. So that means they have kind of a permanently polarized capsule design. And it's more traditional, I mean, it's more common type of condenser microphone you see these days. It does have some weatherproofing on the circuit board. So the circuit board is actually coated in basically some sort of plastic that keeps it from being damaged if it gets wet. And I believe that was carried over to the S Mic 2S as well. So that's one thing. The NTG5, on the other hand, is different from the standpoint that it uses an RF bias condenser design. So it's a completely different principle that it uses for actually transducing. So as the sound waves move the capsule, it uses a different technology to figure out how to convert that movement of the capsule into an electrical signal that gets sent out into your recorder, or to your preamplifier. So they're quite different from that standpoint. RF bias microphones, while they can be tricky to design, they are actually very good at standing up in adverse weather conditions. By that I mean extreme humidity, like rainforest humidity, things of that nature, because just the design makes it so that they tend to keep working, they tend to keep sounding good even when it is super humid, whereas on other types of condenser microphones, JFET or true condenser as many people call them, the problem is if you get enough humidity kind of condensing on the capsule, that affects the capsule's performance and it starts to sound bad. So while the S-Mic 2 and presumably the S-Mic 2S are going to not be destroyed if you drop them in water or get them wet, they're not necessarily going to continue working well until you let them dry out, whereas RF bias microphones will typically do well even if they get a little bit wet or are working in really high humidity. So that's how they're different. And then of course there's a world of difference in terms of design of the polar pattern and the way the capsule, it just works, and how it transduces the sound energy. So it's definitely some things. All right. If you don't mind, Curtis, I'm so new at the MixPre 10.2. Do I need to adjust the gain? Yes. Well, you should. My take on it is you should adjust the gain. So I would do your gain staging just like you would when you're working in 24-bit mode. If you are working in 32-bit mode, just generally I would do that, because I think the thing is that microphones are designed to have some amount of gain applied to them, and I think somehow magically the Zoom F6 does a pretty decent job. Like the microphones sounded pretty similar. Like I didn't hear a huge difference when I had those sound samples between the F6, the MixPre 2, and the Sound Devices 888. But there are cases where sometimes if you apply a very little gain to a microphone, it may not respond the same way. The voicing may change, the timbre may change of what you get. So I would typically encourage people to still gain up on the MixPre. For sure. Okay. All right, let's see here. Looking forward to the review for the NTG5. Definitely plan on that coming soon. Slav Guns started a tad later. It did, and I apologize. I did not advertise this one ahead of time because I wasn't sure what time I was going to be able to start. So I apologize for that. I guess not in advance. In retrospect, Lloyd says RX is simply amazing and powerful, but we all know this, and I agree. Slav Guns, is the mic volume lower? Is it just me? It is lower. This is one where I don't have I don't have the chance to. There's no gain control on this. I'm using what is called the Sennheiser digital clip mic, or mic clip mic digital. It goes straight into the iPhone's Lightning port. So there is no, as far as I know, there's no adjustment on this. You can mute the microphone, but that's it. All right. Alejandro, Curtis, are you going to do a compare and contrast with the NTG3 versus NTG5 and the 416? Yes, definitely, especially when it comes to polar pattern. I think that's where you're going to see the biggest difference. I don't know how much of a difference there's going to be between the NTG5 and the 3, but I think there will be a difference between the 416 and the Rode microphones. So that's where I've seen the biggest difference in the past, was the 416 has a significantly different polar pattern, which is significantly more directional. Mark, would you have the opportunity to take us along on one of your pro sound jobs and have someone shadow you with a camera so we could see you work? It's a great idea. Just got to find someone to do that. If any of you are in the Salt Lake, Utah area and you'd like to come do that, that would be awesome. I think this is from Blake. I think that's most of the issue in the audio world. Most people just have the outboard gear as fun toys that look impressive. Outboard gear lacks a Control Z button as well. It's true. You got to know what you're doing, and you got to apply it with taste if you're going to bake something into the recording. Mark, I was just going to ask him the same thing. Slice Max, when is the NTG5 review published? It will be published, if everything goes as planned, next Sunday, so 1 week from today. Greg, microphones are your first EQ. If they don't sound exactly how you like, then you can EQ exactly how you like, then you can EQ in post, yes. Now that we have 32-bit recorders, are there any mics you'd recommend for recording live music? Live music is not something I do a whole lot. I wish I could do more of it, but time is the thing. So I don't necessarily know that I have a lot of, there are some Neumann mics, the KM, what is the KM? It's a legendary mic, I don't remember. 185 is the number that comes to mind. I'm not sure that's right, but that's probably one I would look at. I don't know in terms of, if you're looking for something with extreme dynamic range, that's a worthy question. I need to do some more experimenting. I have the Rode TF5s. Those were evidently designed in conjunction with Tony Faulkner, who does classical music recordings primarily. And presumably those should have a pretty wide dynamic range as well. And they sound pretty good, I can say that. But I need to do a little bit more work with some musical instruments to see. Any recommendation for a reporter type mic regarding the second comment? We'll be in Vegas in January. That's not too far away. Let me get, I have a couple mics here. Let me get that. The white balance is changing all the time. Two mics that I have experience with that are specifically reporter mics. Number one is the Electro Voice RE50L, L meaning long-handled. So this is kind of a classic. And what's curious about this one is it's actually an omnidirectional polar pattern. And the fact that it's dynamic is the main thing that it relies upon to pick up sounds close to it and not pick up sounds that are farther away from it. Or in other words, reject sounds that are farther away. So that one's been pretty good. The output signal on this is not super hot, so you do need a preamp that's pretty beefy. Mixed pre could do fine with it. In fact, yeah, Mixed pre could do fine with it. So same with the Zoom F6, F8, F4, any of the newer generation ones. It's going to be the things like the Zoom handy recorders, the H4, H5, H6 that are going to struggle more with those. Another option is the Rode Reporter. Also, this one pretty good. Sound is actually very similar to the Electro Voice. Output signal's a little bit hotter by just a touch. So I've had a good experience with this one as well. The Electro Voice I bought, Rode gave me the Rode Reporter, just as background info. All right. Let's go back to the chat here and see what we've got. Lloyd brings up a good point. Let's go back a little bit here, make sure I got all this. Yep, okay, I got the KM185 right. Whew, good. Okay, so that's a reporter mic. Slice Max, do you think the NTG5 will replace the NTG3? As of right now, it appears that the NTG3 is still in Rode's catalog. I think it'll be interesting to see if the polar pattern is different on those two. That may be a deciding factor. They may see kind of a place for both of those mics still. We'll know by next week. I haven't done those tests yet, so those are the things that are kind of in the wings, so to speak, that I need to work on this week to kind of get a good answer for that. All right, and Hi Curtis, love your videos. How big of a difference could two non-stereo matched microphones have? I have an AT4053B and looking to expand with an addition to one for an XY or similar. So I think we may have talked about this. Maybe was it you? I don't remember. I did have this conversation recently, and maybe some of you that do music recording could chime in on this as well. So the kind of the traditional knowledge or wisdom in regards to matched pair microphones is that if you buy two microphones that have serial numbers that are one after the other, that they're from the same batch, and presumably they will sound, the chances of them sounding the same or having the same frequency response is going to be higher. So those are better suited to be a matched pair. I don't know how true that holds. I think some of the manufacturers will actually sell you a matched pair. And in those cases, certainly with the higher end microphones, I know certainly with like the Sheps and things of that nature, they actually do some engineering work and they actually do some tests in anechoic chambers to ensure that the microphones actually are, within a certain tolerance of similarity. So there's that. You're going to pay probably a little bit more money that way. I don't know if on the lower end that's generally true or necessarily true. They may just be selling them as matched pairs just because they're two mics that are the same model. So I don't know. I haven't done a lot of stereo recording, but you probably, ideally you want them to be close. I know Audio-Technica said, in response to that question, they said, well, our microphones are made with extremely tight manufacturing tolerances, and so any two Audio-Technica 4053Bs are good enough to use as a stereo matched pair. Maybe that's true, I don't know, but that's another thing to consider. So I would be curious, from those of you out there that have done a lot more music recording than me, how critical is it to have a matched pair if you're going to do stereo recordings? There's a question for you. All right. Oh yeah, Lloyd responds back, the KM84 is the older and the KM184 for cardioid. I think the Omni is the 183. So those are definitely some to look at as far as music recording. Oh wow, I'm behind here. Let's see if we can catch up. Greg says in regards to recording sound with microphone recommendations, snare, use an SM57, guitar, use a small and large diaphragm, etc. So lots of different choices there. Archie, welcome. Lloyd says, good recording mics won't change for 24 or 32-bit. However, having a mic with great dynamic range will help, in my opinion. I agree. Slav Guns, I was looking at the RE50, but debating between an Omni and Cardioid for crowded show floors. So the advantage of the Omni, of course, is that you can miss and still get the sound. But you will probably pick up a bit more of the show floor noise. A Cardioid, so I've done interviews at the NAB show floor for 3 or 4 years now. 4 years, I think. 3 of the years I've used the Omni reporter mics, and 1 year I used the Sennheiser, I think it was the MD47. It's the cardioid reporter's mic. I think that probably the Sennheiser did best in terms of rejecting show floor noise. But it was a little bit harder, and there was a lot of kind of back and forth like this to get, the interviewee on the mic, so on and so forth. So MD46, that may be the one. It's a cardioid though, so that's the one I was using, whichever that was. All right. Apologies here, the chat here on the phone is a little bit... Okay, here we go. Aaron, to chime in on your Twitter, Curtis, I don't have Twitter. Regarding the source of the mics you review, personally, 100% trust. I don't care if you bought it or were given it. Your reviews are always reliable and honest. 100% trust from me. I know you read entirely impartial. So this was an interesting conversation that came up. Somebody challenged my review last week. So last week we just reviewed some cinema batteries, and the cinema batteries have a USB-A output, so you can charge phones and things of that nature. And one of the things that the commenter said was, here's the problem with paid reviews. Now, first of all, let me be clear about this. I do accept free gear for reviews, but I do not accept payment for reviews. So in that case, if you're getting paid, it's not a review anymore. So I don't do that. That's something I've never done, and something I never plan to do. The batteries were provided to me free of charge along with the chargers. And so the commenter's point was, and I don't, it's not a bad point. So it just kind of sent me into this mindset where I was kind of thinking things through. And their point was, well, if you were given the gear, there's always this temptation to not be critical of it, to find all its positive points and overlook some of the negatives, or the cons, if you will. One of the things I did not point out from this person's perspective that should have been listed as a con was that the cinema batteries didn't have a USB-C output. That's a fair point, I guess. I didn't see that as a huge con. I don't use the cinema batteries to do a lot of USB charging types of things, but if you do, then I guess it could be a con. So my point, or my thinking was, reviews are going to be subjective. So here's the thing. If somebody pays you to do a review, it's not a review. If someone gives you free gear to do the review, as long as, from my point of view, the way I kind of approach it is, as long as they are not requiring that they review my video review before I upload it, and they give me freedom to say whatever I want, then I think that's fair. But there's also this idea, and that is, if you buy a piece of gear and then review it, there's a risk there of bias as well, because now you may have this internal mechanism to justify why you made a good choice buying such and such piece of gear. So we humans are biased. It's just plain and simply the case. So that's why I asked that question on Twitter. What would you guys suggest? So the one thing that I've thought for a long time is, well, maybe we could do something where we crowdfund reviews, where we say, okay, these are the three things I'm looking at reviewing. If you guys want to see a review of, A, please, donate $5 or something to the purchase of A, and then we'll buy it, and then we'll review it, and then at the end of the review, I'll give it away to someone who anteed into the purchasing pot for that, and we'll move on. And that way, we kind of potentially remove some of the bias. I don't know if that's really realistic. B, if that solves the problem or not. It is a kind of a thought I had, but in any case, those are some thoughts in regards to all that crazy stuff. Okay, scrolling back to catch up on this here. All right, so Alejandro, Curtis, I know you can do ambisonic recordings on the Zoom F-Series recorders when someone needs to do this type of recording. Also, which mic would you recommend? So I have not done any ambisonic recording myself yet, but the two main contenders of which I am aware are the Sennheiser Ambio mic, and then also Rode makes one as well. I don't remember what Rode's is called, but those are the two major players. In the reviews I've seen, the Sennheiser I think the Sennheiser sounded a little more realistic. I think the Rode had a little bit of a color to it. So, but it's pretty minor. So I can't really, don't make any buying decisions based on what I just said. You probably should go do some more research, but in any case, there's some thoughts there. All right, for field recordings, do you prefer ORTF or XY stereo? I would typically, ORTF is typically going to give you a more stereophonic effect. XY is going to eliminate any potential phase issues or reduce potential phase issues. So I would experiment with that. When when I'm doing field recording, I typically just am recording mono. I know I need to get to the point where I'm doing stereo ambiances, but I'm just not there yet. But that's a fair question and a good one that I don't know the answer to. Aaron said, Rode said the same to me about the batch numbers. They said to keep it within 100 digits on the serial number. They're right. I have two M3s for robust outdoor ambiances. They're amazingly matched. Okay, that's great. Good info. Thank you, Aaron. Can you recommend any software that can do automatic after-the-fact auto mixing for interviews to suppress the non-speaker? Mark asked that. That is a good question. The only thing of which I am aware is the online processing service. What is it called? Auphonic. AUPHONIC. Go to auphonic.com. Basically, what you have to do is upload the audio, the multi-track audio, and I believe there's now a new feature in there that will basically do what you're talking about. Basically, an auto mix is what it will do. So definitely worth giving that a try. Archie asks, what microphones would you recommend for Foley? Environmental, ambiance, outdoors, indoors, music instruments. A couple MKH 416 is a good start. Yeah, so I think for Foley, I have definitely used shotgun microphones. The most recent project, I used the MTG5 here. Got great results. I've typically used shotgun microphones when I do Foley, just so you get that isolation because you're really trying to capture that isolated sound. So typically those work pretty nicely. All right. Hey, Fresh Brownie. This topic was partly for you because you asked a question about my streaming setup. I hope you find it helpful. Okay, happy Sunday, friends. MD46 was the other one I was looking at. That's back from Slav Guns. I think that's worth looking at too. I'm about to go live, but I wanted to stop by and say hello. Thanks again for what you do, Curtis. The pleasure is definitely mine. Aaron says, XY is safer for mono mixdown. ORTF better emulates human ear position. Depends on your use case. Mid-side is a really great all-rounder if you don't mind tinkering in post. Yeah, that's a great point. So mid-side is another stereo recording technique that's pretty interesting, and it gives you some flexibility in post to affect the stereo width, which is pretty interesting. Slavgun says, I say this from someone who does all three. You get gear for free, you get free plus paid, and you pay for your own. Okay. Aha, you just covered the bias of buying self. I think doing reviews without the gear would be the worst. Good point. Is there a difference between the amp quality between the Zoom H5 and the H6? I assume you're referring to the preamp. I believe spec-wise that there is. I think the H6 can, if you look at the specifications on the Zoom site, I believe the H6 provides a little bit more gain. It's not a ton, but definitely worth checking out. Go look at the specs for sure, but I think there is a little bit of a difference. They're not exactly the same design. Last I seem to recall. That's from memory, so definitely check that. Lloyd says, I like mid-side for most things. However, as Aaron Knight said, you need to be willing to post-process. Great point. Yeah, and I think, again, the main advantage of mid-side is that you have some freedom in post to, if things didn't quite work the way you thought they might, and again, you can adjust the stereo width and so on and so forth. In regards to your streaming, how did you get comment bubbles from the chat appearing in your broadcast in the other live broadcast? So that was the reason I'm not doing it here. I'm using the YouTube app on my phone tonight, which is why you're not seeing them, and I'm having a bear of a time scrolling through them. The reason I was able to do that before is that I use an app called Ecamm Live, ECAMM Live, and that's a Mac-only app, but it has that feature. So it'll show the chat, and then in addition, in the chat, there's a link underneath each comment, and you click on that link, and it shows it in the broadcast page. So really nice. All right, Slav Guns. I first started following your channel as much as I did because you disclose, and this is in regards to reviews and who paid for what. I respect you very much for that. I have no issues with companies sending you stuff or pay. Thank you, Jason. Jason just offered the first $5 towards a crowdfunding review. Thanks for that. Lloyd Puckett, yeah, I just can't get enough mid-side. It's also great for recovering clipped audio. Clipped mid-side recordings stand better chance of fixing in post when you render. Interesting. That I didn't know. That's good to know. I think I need to give some of that a try. Mark, you're extremely worried about bias. Multiple YouTubers would need to collaborate with a neutral third party. Vendors send to the third party. They send to you. No risk of vendor cutting you off. Yeah, I do. So that's a good point, Mark. So I do have a relationship with B&H, and I have borrowed gear from them, which actually worked pretty nicely. And so we'll probably look at doing some of that as well. Continue to do some of that. Nathan says, really appreciate your reviews, which have helped me to decide on a Zoom F6 and a Rode NTG5. When might we see a course on the F6? Great question. We are going to do a course on the F6. It's just a matter of getting time. I will probably start working on it over the holiday, so in December, but I don't know that it's going to be ready until I get another. What it comes down to is a course takes a fair bit of time, at least a week usually, to put together a decent course. So it's just a matter of getting enough time off from the day job. That's the challenge that I have. So I'm hopeful that sometime in the spring, I wish it would be sooner, but probably sometime in the spring to be realistic. Do you use a studio mixer, switcher, or an ATEM? I don't. I'm just using that Ecamm Live app, and it works pretty nicely. Aaron says, I'll send you a mid-side recovery example if you like. That would be awesome, Aaron. I would appreciate that. Blake asks, what things should I consider when using a small diaphragm condenser as a boom for interviews? I also plan to law the subject as well. Well, I think it's really about mic placement. So Blake, it's just a matter of experimenting with mic placement. Typically facing down at a roughly 45-degree angle. Some people like to go at a steeper angle than that, so a little bit more downward facing. The idea there is that when you face the mic down towards the person, it's different from facing the microphone straight on at them, because then you can pick up any ambiance that's coming from behind them. So aiming down, typically you can isolate them a little bit better, depending on, if there's a hard surface under, that they're on the floor or whatever. So that's just a matter of kind of put on some headphones and point your mic in different directions around someone who's talking, and it'll become clear pretty quickly. Archie, how would you recommend buying used audio gear? eBay, I heard quality audio gear has longevity. That is true. You can definitely get yourself some really good deals. I think another place that's worth looking at are if you're in the United States, the Pro Sound outlets, especially those that are aimed at filmmaking, or the ones I'm most familiar with. It's going to be Gotham Sound, True Audio, Production Sound Corp, Audio Department. There are others as well. The problem is that they're usually not. They're not in all locations. They're mostly around the True Audio. Yes, TREW. They're around the major filmmaking centers, so they may not be accessible depending on where you're located. But they usually list their used gear online. The nice thing about them is that they have a technical crew that can ensure that the products are working. So they're usually going to be a little bit more reliable. If you buy off of eBay, there's a little bit more risk. My friend Scott bought some an electrosonics receiver, a dual channel receiver. I don't know where he got it, but it stopped working. We actually brought it to NAB, and we were going to use that as the, to make the recordings, but he couldn't get it to work. It like turned on for a second and then it just died. So we went over to the electrosonics booth, and they're like, well, send it in and we'll take a look at it. So we did. After NAB sent it in, they opened it up and it was completely corroded inside. So it looked like someone had probably dropped it in some salt water and then did their best to clean up the outside and sold it. So you just want to be careful of that kind of thing. Again, if you buy from those the dealers that also sell the new gear, a lot of times they'll have the staff on hand to kind of inspect it before they put it up for sale. So definitely something to consider there. All right, Mark Randall, would a Rode M5 be satisfactory for an overhead boom for recording in an interview? They seem to be more focused on instruments. I think it could be used. I don't know what the polar pattern on it is on that. I think it's a cardioid, and certainly that could be used. Rode in the early days was mostly focused on music recording. They entered the film world a little bit later, so even though it was originally designed for music, it can potentially be used. And I've heard actually, there were some tests online I heard one point. It sounded pretty good, so could potentially be useful. Thoughts on the Sennheiser G4 line being as ubiquitous as the previous G3 line? Well, there's so many more options in the marketplace today, I doubt that they're going to be quite as popular as they were, but I think you're going to see a lot of them too. Although it looked like the G4, they kind of took a different approach with it from someone who broke one open. It looked like it had, I don't remember the details, but if you go, where was that? Do some research on that. I just have vague recollections that Andrew Jones, who now works at Deity, before that he was with, I think he helped start an online presence called Wave Report. And I think they did a breakdown. If you go check out the Wave Report blog, I think you're going to find they did a breakdown on that and took a look at them. So definitely something worth looking at. I would totally shadow your shoots if I was in your area, but if you're ever in San Diego for an event or need some coverage, I would happily help cover you. Oh, well, thanks. I actually was in San Diego last summer, just a few months ago, and my sister lives in the area, so that may actually happen. Aaron says the M5 is cardioid and follows that up with Rode's NTG range is best for booming. And then Archie is in the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay, cool. People, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the questions and the input. I appreciate everyone who has contributed so much to the sessions here. It's been really nice to build this community and to see all of the enthusiasm out there for recording sound and making great sound. So keep that up. We'll talk to you all again next week at the latest. Take care, everybody.